whatever happened to me, it was very neurotoxic, and it was something that sort of manifested itself, pushed that a little too far, wherein it becomes an irrational or a fear that can take over other aspects of your life.
What was the perception of the society when you were going through all this?
If I were in a social situation that I could comport myself just enough, in a capacity
Okay.
that seemed normal and seemed like I was together in speech fluency, the capacity to retain short-term memory, to even understand what somebody was saying to me. Somebody could speak that balance, much like you just said, you do the exercises necessary.
So, what helped you to heal your things? Like speech is a big one. Now, when I have watched your so many podcasts, no one can tell that you went through all this. So, what really helped you with the healing?
Hello, beautiful people. I hope you all are doing well. Welcome to Inward Strides with Savni. Today, I'm joined by Justin McSweeney. He's a podcast host of the show IdeaCast Illuminate. It's a raw human to human connection where Justin has opened up about his own transitions. Also, how deep conversations with his guest became part of his healing, and how reflection, curiosity, and stillness can be powerful tools for the human race. Let's begin.
All right. How are you doing today, Justin?
I'm very well, Sawani. Thank you so much for asking.
Let's start with this. Was there a moment when you realized that something in your life had to change?
Yes, I have one of those stories. This is one of those moments where you're kind of faced with a choice, and this manifested itself as a kind of a physical illness, but it affected me cognitively, it affected me mentally, and I can only suspect or maybe deduce that it came from maybe a toxic mold sickness in my house or something. We did end up finding quite a bit of mold after I had become ill. But whatever happened to me, it was very neurotoxic, and it was something that sort of manifested itself as a strong or severe decline in speech fluency, the capacity to retain short-term memory, to even understand what somebody was saying to me. Somebody could speak to me and I wouldn't really understand what was being said. And there were physical or somatic manifestations as well. So needless to say, that was very disturbing and upsetting. And that was one of those precipice moments where I was confronted, not necessarily with my mortality, because I don't think I was dying, but I was being reduced to a cognitively, what I would call a vegetative state. I was just not functioning. And that's very disconcerting. And so I was granted the opportunity in all of this to ask some strong existential questions and find some sense of direction and means to extract myself or extricate myself from what had happened. And in that, I'm a very stubborn and determined person, and I think that helped cash out my capacity to do that. And the actual rehabilitation and recovery was a long path. It took us several years to get back to some semblance of normalcy. And I'd gone to neurologists and physicians and so forth. They couldn't do anything for me, but they also couldn't give me a strong opinion as to what was going on, which was confounding in a way. It's nice to have a good solid answer and like, here's your problem and take these steps and you'll be okay. So I was sort of fumbling for what might be a recovery or a retrieval of my previous cognitive capacity and my previous means of just functioning normally in the world. So very significant, but I tried to stay positive and upbeat because I think that in itself is a means to carry oneself through an adverse situation or a life-altering situation and to the degree. So if someone is faced with a cancer diagnosis or a degenerative illness that may be autoimmune related like Parkinson's or MS, you really, this is a no-brainer. You want to stay on that sunny side of disposition to face this challenge and face that which can be very frightening and very upsetting. So, and we see that a lot in the folks that do emerge from either a death sentence through cancer. You've got stage 4, you had 6 months to live, and some people transcend that and they continue to live despite what the
Yeah.
physician says. And I always admire and respect those folks that managed it. And I assume that they are outliers, that a lot of folks, do succumb to the illness. And so I'm straying a little bit on a tangent, but that's kind of the embodiment that I was seeking. I wanted to channel that kind of thinking and say, I wish to embody that survivor, that person that said, I didn't even know what my odds were. I figured I was toast. I figured I was going to end up in a nursing home or something. So probably very low odds that I would retrieve myself and find some normalcy in my life again. So that was in around 2011. And I'd say probably by 2016 or so, I was back to a reasonable degree. I was back to where I would consider myself being healthy or baseline, or however we want to frame that. So that's the ick story. That's the oopsie story of my adult life.
So what helped you to heal your things? Like speech is the big one. Now when I have watched your so many podcasts, no one can tell that you went through all this. So what really helped you with the healing?
As mentioned a moment ago, it was probably equal parts tenacity and probably my ego a little bit. I didn't want to, end up being somebody's award in a hospital or a nursing home or something. I did not want to be in that situation. I just, I don't think any of us would want that. If you're 96 years old, and then you have to be pragmatic and realize that your body is starting to slow down or shut down. But at 41, I was like, no, I don't want to end up like that. So there was a little bit of that, which I think is healthy. I think it's a survival instinct that kicks in, and you're just like, no, I want to be my own. I want to have agency. I want to have my own capacity to maintain myself and function normally. And so that was a key driver, as well as, again, the stubbornness, the bullheadedness in me that said, this is unacceptable and I will figure out a way. And despite the fact that there was this sort of Mysterian absence of information in the medical caregivers that weren't a lot. I went to probably 2 or 3 doctors, but they were all, something happened, and I was not given much of a direction from them in terms of therapy or in terms of recovery. I just, and I was articulate with what was going on. I was sharing the manifestations of what was going on. So, but I don't hold that against them. This was something that I feel like I had to take on my own. So, and even to this day, and I'm in my mid 50s now, so I'm probably already getting a little cognitive decline, but I'd say I'm feeling a little bit of background of what was there at that time, so there's a little haziness back there. A lot of times I'll tell people it's kind of like when you take a cold medicine and you just get fogged out a little bit and you're just not quite 100% present. That's kind of very lightly where I am, certainly much better than it was back then. But that's kind of how I describe it to people. It's like you took a Sudafed or something and you're just like a little fogged out for the day.
So is it safe to say that your self-belief and your belief that, okay, nothing is going to happen to me and I'm going to be like there, like the self-talk really helped you in a way to get better?
I think so. I think I did have to have repeated conversations with myself and repeated check-ins with myself to say, this is scary as heck. This is really not good, but you have no other choice. You are moving frame by frame by frame into the future. And I can remember sitting on the couch when I was in the throes of this, in the sort of height of all of this, and having these really disturbing episodes where I felt like I was just losing my grip on staying together. Not like insanity, because I think this is cliche, but when somebody does cross that threshold, that they don't even realize that they've crossed the threshold. They think everything's fine, but outwardly others who care for them say that, this is a psychotic break, or this is somebody who's entered into psychosis. And it felt like that, though. It felt like I was just losing my grip. So I say that to add effect to the idea that it was a strong motivational device to say, you've got to figure something out, because this is not good. You don't want to keep having these episodes. You don't want to keep living this way. And so I checked in with diet, and I had a job that was physical. So I managed to maintain, working while I was doing this, because again, I didn't say this yet, I was self-employed. So, that was something I just couldn't afford to fall down on. So my body was functional enough that I was able to get out and do stuff. And my wife was there for me to help, with looking out for me and things like that. But I was able to continue. So the physical exercise and keeping the body functional and moving and taking strides to stay healthy, cardio and things like that, was on board. And again, I checked in with my diet. I tried to eat as healthy and clean as I could, do supplemental vitamins and things like that. And that, I think, made a difference, because this again was a neurological exogenic coming into my body, would affect that. So even something as simple as caffeine, like tea or coffee, if I did drink that things would get crazy. And forget about alcohol or anything else, that would upset it. So it was trial and error. In other words, it was like, okay, what's this going to do, or what reaction am I getting from that? And it seemed like the cleaner I ate and the less I played around with things like caffeine, or I don't know what else would set me off back then, but just stuff I learned. Yeah, just to be mindful of what I was doing with my body.
Yeah, beautiful. So, what was the perception of the society when you were going through all this? Was it supportive, or there were like eyes, or what was it? And how were you able to deal with it?
I was fortunate in that if I were in a social situation, that I could comport myself just enough, in a capacity that seemed normal and seemed like I was together. Even though inside I might have been a train wreck, but I never was exposed to folks when I was at my worst. And, my wife saw it, but she just kept being my cheerleader and supporting me. But, in terms of going out in public, I managed to keep it together. And fortunately, I think for 7 or 8 months after this thing happened, I didn't really go out and do much at all. I was just more go do my job, go do what I have to do, get home, and then and sleep was my reprieve. If I went to sleep, I wasn't suffering with whatever, but I'd wake up and I'm like, oh, it's still there, and I feel, really wonky. And so, but yeah, social situations, I was fortunate that I didn't have to engage too much with others. And then again, as a few months or a year rolled by, I could handle that very well. And just, I would stutter sometimes, or I'd glitch, So, but not to the degree that it would disturb anybody at the dinner table with me, like, what's wrong with him? He's creepy. Kids are like, no. But yeah, it was good. I was able to carry myself in a dignified manner in public.
So what motivated you to start the podcast?
Okay, this idea was in its nascent developmental stages, I think, when I was doing a kind of, I'd call it like a psycho-spiritual journey. So I want to get outside of mere existence, out of mere living, and ask some bigger questions. What's going on? What's happening? Not just, what's happening to poor me. It's more, what is the human condition? What is suffering? What is well-being? And so big questions, existential questions, coupled with how do, we mentioned mindfulness a minute ago. How do we connect with ourselves in a more intimate manner, and a manner that affords us a means to stop interacting with the world and having some reflective time, contemplative time, or inward quiet time, like, again, mindfulness. And so the podcast started with a gal that I had met at a meditation conference, and unfortunately she had ALS, and and so when I went to this meditation conference, she was in a wheelchair. She still could verbally communicate a little bit, but you had to focus on what she was saying. So here I am thinking, oh, I'm dealing with adversity. And my new friend, my first guest, Terry, she was dealing with something exponentially larger than what I was. And so this was a humbling moment. And I connected with her, and there was this empathy, for where I've been, but also for, again, orders of magnitude greater that other people have to deal with in the world. So she wrote a book called No Pressure, No Diamonds, and I got a copy. I purchased a copy of it, and I read it. Absolutely a wonderful book. And it's basically on how to die, how to accept the cards that were handed to her. And it's the interview. She had to use a vocoder. She had to use eye contact with a computer screen to have phonetic, sentences formed. And so I sent her a series of questions ahead of time, and she had the time to answer them at her pace. And so in the first part of the conversation, it was her just answering my questions. And I don't know if I was clever enough to like record myself asking the question. I can't remember now. It's been 4 years. So something to that effect. But she was wonderful, and she had a beautiful vitality flowing through the vocoder. Her spirit, her essence was coming through on this otherwise sterile kind of, well, thank you for asking this question, but her spirit was still there. And then in the second half of the conversation, we went on a live Zoom, and her husband was there, and he was a therapist as well. And we talked about some hard stuff. And that was very cathartic for me. And it was also very touching for me as a human, a human relations or a human interest kind of thing, that here is somebody who's standing in the face of what would really upset most of us, or all of us. I don't think any of us looks forward to that moment or that time, and knowing that it's on the calendar, like again with somebody with stage 4 cancer, that they wrote something on the calendar for you, and this is it. So wonderful conversation, wonderful interview. I was so privileged to be able to have her as my first guest. And that set the pace for, I just recorded 138 today. I had another guest on a little while ago. I've been on a Zoomathon today. Yeah, 138. It was wonderful.
Amazing.
And she had yeah. So that's the provenance. That's where it began. And like I said, this is April, I think, makes 4 years. So it's just been about 4 years.
First of all, it is beautiful how it started. And I feel like you were meant to do this, to tell the stories of other people to the world. So I'm super grateful. I have watched some of the podcasts on your channel, and they are amazing. I'm going to put the link down in the description so that people can go and watch, and they can get a lot of knowledge about different topics. So thank you for doing that. Now, when you were telling about Terry, one thing that caught my attention was dying aspect, like the death. And I wanted to ask you, because I recently did an exercise of how to get rid of your fears in fastest way. And the first thing that came in front of me was the death. And and then I realized when the fear of death, I'm able to see that if that is gone, then all other fears become like a laughing thing. It became a laughing thing, and it was a really interesting exercise that I went through. So I wanted to ask, what have you discovered about death, or what are your thoughts on it?
Right. Well, I appreciate what you just said in the sense that we all should have a mortal, I don't know if fear is the right word, but a sort of a tense relationship with mortality. I think that's healthy. I think that's what will keep us preserved. But then we can push that a little too far, wherein it becomes an irrational or a fear that can take over other aspects of your life. And I think for anyone listening, if this is something that is of concern to you, that there is a way to, I think, and we're all different, but there is a way to strike that balance, much like you just said, you do the exercises necessary to make peace with that. For myself, I don't fear death for a nanosecond. I don't want to die in pain. But dying itself doesn't mean anything to me. And it partly because I was maybe on the threshold with this weird thing that I had. And I thought, there were times when, and I hope I can talk about one taking one's own life under adverse conditions, that was very reasonable to me, that ending my existence was a humane thing to do in certain moments during those months or a year or so of dealing with that, and I hope that's not upsetting to anybody, but yeah, it's what I think a lot of people who are faced with severe health issues, to me it's understandable that comes up, and it's not that you should act on that. And so my friend Terry, she actually took her own life on her terms, and she was allowed to do that. And given that she had lost just about all of her faculties, physically, speech, all of this, bless her heart, I wouldn't have lasted as long as she did. So anyway, I know this is kind of rough, but we are talking about death. So again, going back, I don't want to sound like I'm, bravado or anything, but I really just, the idea of dying does not matter to me at all. And I can explain maybe in some philosophical perspectives that I have about this, and my being at peace with it. But like I said, I only ask if there were options available that I go quietly. And I would love to continue to live many more years. I don't wish to pass anytime soon, and that's one of the gifts that I learned, I had extracted from being ill for a couple of years, is that, wow, life is great, and I have a lot of respect for it, and I wish to continue. And that's one of the drivers, again, behind podcasting. Like you said, it's getting people's stories out there, and how do I be a good human and a good contributing person to the common, to our society. And this is one small way to do it, is to just bring people on and have stories. And like you and I are doing, like the space that you opened up for both of us, if it touches one life, if it helps one person to feel some comfort or something for themselves, it's positive, then that's awesome. It's totally awesome. So yeah, no fear of death, but just respect for life on the other side of that coin. Just an absolute reverence for being, but knowing that when it's time for me to go, that's fine. I'm good. I have no fear.
So do you believe in rebirth because of that? What's that reason for someone to know?
I have a very strange take on what we would call reincarnation. It's somewhat heterodox. So I like the idea of a continuum, but I don't know. So I'll use myself as a for instance. I'm obviously ignorant to the fact that I may have existed previous as a soul, as an ensouled creature. I consider myself to be ensouled now. I have this Elan Vital, who said Elan Vital? Was it Heidegger or Bergson? It might have been Henri Bergson. It's Elan Vital. It is the force, it is the essence, and it is what we're doing. We are sharing information, we're sharing emotions and feelings, and that to me is ensoulment, that this blob of blood and bones and skin is capable of communicating with you and opening up space and having a meaningful conversation. To me, that is the ensoulment. And so whether I continue beyond bodily death is of no matter. It's just like my fear of death doesn't matter, because what I want to imagine, and this is where I kind of will do a different take on continuance, is that anything I've said or done in this lifetime will have reverberance. It will have a rhizomial kind of spread into the world, and the podcast is one way to do it. The work that you're doing will have a continuance, and it's passed to the next filial, the next generation. And I say this with humility because, I'm not expecting to have people quote Justin. It's the information that's important. It's not Justin at all. It's the information. And everything I talk about is usually co-opted from someone else. I may synthesize it a little bit, but I'm passing on things that were given to me. So I love philosophy. I'm talking about people, Anaximander and Plato and Socrates, people that lived 3,200 years ago, around that time. But this is going way back, and we're still talking about these people. The Buddha was around in 500 BCE, and people still, to this day, there are millions of people devoted to focusing on the simple truths, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. It's still there. And that to me is the ensoulment of what we're all doing. And so whether I continue to exist as an individual entity is of no importance to me. I would rather that the essence of what I am given from those who stand behind me, the ancestors, that I pass that forward. And I pass it forward in good faith and with the intent that it is to be delivered and received for the betterment of the young person, preferably somebody who can learn from that, because I've learned from others, from elders and people who have been gone for a long time. So that's kind of how I view it. It's not typical. It's not like I think, Justin will be another human in a few years after he passes. If that's the case, that's fine, but I would probably be more at ease. So this brings up a sticky wicket of karma. Like in my lifetime, I don't think I've done anything really terrible. But if I have lessons to repeat, I would feel so bad that some other living system has to carry my baggage, So I would almost think that, because I think when we talk about things like karma, or in the Abrahamic system like sin and punishment and redemption, I almost think it's like our salving our horror of some of the inhumanity that occurs. It's like, oh, the karma will get that person, or and I know this isn't true karma that we're talking. This is more of a Western misinterpretation of karma. It's not, karma itself is not what I'm talking about, but it seems to get incorporated that way, or misappropriated that way. So anyway, I'm making a big mess of things here by diverting, but I think for me, what I would consider to be absolutely wonderful is that the mind of humanity carries forward from generation to generation to generation. And we do inherit karma. In real time, we inherit the horrors of wars past, and those wounds of war are not solved in the polity and the cultural normatives and things like that, that the war flames can come back up again and people will suffer and die. So I think that there is this play that goes on, much like we would talk about on an individual level as we cycle through lives. Now, I also have deep respect for the story of the karma, like maybe the Buddha or the Brahman and the Maya and the illusion and the separation and Brahma not realizing that it is itself, and its experience. I think there's so much power in that. So I'm agnostic to whether this system will manifest again. But what I would be perfectly happy with is that this system pass something on in its existence. And then when it perishes, it may reassimilate, I kind of like the idea of like Akashic records and that there is a storehouse of all experience. I'm vaguely open to that in some maybe not literal sense that there is a library of all the experience. But I think somewhere there may be something like that. Or not somewhere, because there is no where. We want to get weird for a second. So to me, it's complicated, and we should have humility when we talk about that. So that's where I would probably leave it, is that I am just as ignorant as anybody else. My wish is that anything anyone does is carried forward into the next generation. And even if it's something terrible, if it's a bad person who does a bad thing, that we all say, let's not do that again. Let's not be like that. Or like, I love sainted people. There are Christian mystics that I just absolutely adore, or Sri Anandamamai, or somebody who is just a wonderful sage that just lights you up when you hear about them. But they're gone. The body is gone, but the spirit just, I bring up Sri Anandamamai because when I see her face, in fact, she's on one of my screens and I'm just, the love just comes out. Or Hildegard van Bergen, and Marie Poiret is a French mystic, Christian mystic. And when I think of her and I meditate on her, it just blows my mind. So they're still there. All of that is still there. So anyway.
So you have taken...
Sorry.
No, all good. So you have taken so many great names. So how did you learn about them? Like, because each one has their own unique perspective, and that was interesting for me when you were taking these names. So how did you learn about them? How did you perceive what their teachings?
So I have my scanner. And thank goodness for the internet. And I'm old. I was there I was around before the internet. So there's books, and you go to a library or you get a encyclopedia. But now, thank goodness, we have the immediacy of so much information. And so the discovery is so much easier. And so people like Ibn Arabi, who was a Sufi mystic, Marie Poiret, they have a commonality. They were informed by a strain of Neoplatonism, a lineage of this kind of Mediterranean and Near Eastern perspectively inquiring into really deep things with metaphysics and ontology and things like that. And so I see the commonality. Again, Poiret, anyway, she was taken in as a child to a Celtic missionary that was informed by Neoplatonism. So she was informed by Neoplatonism. And then when she went through her mystical experiences, she had on board this kind of psychotechnology, this kind of prescribed wisdom tradition that helped her to sense make what she was experiencing. And Ibn Arabi, who was an amazing thinker and speaking to insoluble, ineffable things about divinity and so forth, use the same kind of common language. This, again, the psychotechnology, which is, writing is psychotechnology, and paperback books and things like that. They're all tools to help us understand. So when I catch what somebody's doing and has that salience, that similarity to it, then I focus on it and I say, oh my gosh, and this is what this person did with that. So Greek Orthodox Christianity is largely informed, or its etymology is that of Neoplatonism. So it shows up in there. And I'm not a Neoplatonist, but they have some really nice core ideas that are easy. They're all like heuristics. They're easy to understand. So there's the true, the good, and the beautiful is sort of a tagline. And there's the logos and the nous. And there's a tripartite system that they have, which is much like Christianity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But that was co-opted from Platonism. So I see these synergistic weaving and convergences and things like that. And a lot of that was informed by Eastern tradition. One of the people that I really love is Pyrrho of Elis and Sextus Empiricus, and they were called the Pyrrhonian skeptics in Greek, the academies that would argue about what is eudaimonia. Well, Pyrovelis went with Alexander the Great to northern India by way of the Hindu Kush region, and he hung out with the Gymnosophists, who were early Buddhists. And the Gymnosophists would just sit and ask questions all day. They were skeptics. They wanted to know more and more and more, and they never really rested on any concrete propositional ideas. And so Pyro was just mind blown. He went back to the West, to Greece, and he got into arguments with the Stoics and the Cynics, academicians, and other people that were, having these discussions. And he used that as a tool of sense making and understanding. And again, that was then carried forward into generations that in Plato, and this is me speculating, it shows up that we have sort of, again, that which we understand about Vedanta and Buddha, and it's synthesized into the West, and the West did what they did with it. And then it shows up again. I say all that because that's kind of some of the roots that formed Neoplatonist thinking, which informs a lot of what we do now. A lot of spiritual traditions in the West have this lineage, this genealogy or etymology. So I'll stop there because I've been on a long-winded roll, and I'll give you a space to ask a question. But yeah, it all revolves around similarities of themes and repeated ideas that show up in how we sense make.
I was actually listening it to the point because this is something new thing for me, that okay, there is the Western whatever spiritual aspect is related to Greek and other regions. This was a new thing for me. Like, I've heard in pieces, but how you explained it, that was really interesting. I'll read more on that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it goes back the other way too. I have one example, and I'll hush up, but the Sri Aurobindo, who was educated in the West, his father was an Anglophile and sent his son to Oxford. And Sri Aurobindo became fascinated with Hegel. And so he came back to India as a Hegelian to an extent, informed by Hegelian thinking and Hegelian dialectic. He was flirting with idealism, so the Westerners, the idealists, were co-opting things from Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta and formulating their own ideas. And then Aurobindo takes it back and then reincorporates it with his sensibilities, because he became an ethno-nationalist. He didn't want anything to do with Anglophilia anymore, get the colonial people out of there. But in that love for Hegel, he was able to kind of close the loop. And really what the idealists of the Weimar region, the intellectuals of the mid-19th century were doing when they co-opted Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism and some of these ideas from the East, and that had been happening on several, like we were just talking about with Pyrovelis and all, it just goes back and forth. And so Aurobindo is an example of somebody who brought a little bit of that Western Hegelian dialectic back into his scheme. And Aurobindo, for me, has been a very difficult person to understand. I started in my early 20s. I kind of have a feeble grasp of where he's going with his metaphysics and his idea of what's going on. But I just love because Hegel is impossible to understand. The guy's just absolutely abstruse as all get out. So sorry, I had to close out with just that one last back, and it's reciprocal. It's we go back and forth. So
Yeah, thanks for the perspective and everything you shared. Yeah, I'm sure audience will get a lot of new aspects. So now let's get back to, I'll ask a few questions related to identity evolution. So let's say, is there something you used to attach your self-worth to, and now it feels lighter to let go of with whatever you had attached your self-worth with?
I think I have an ego that is present, it is forceful, and it wants to be heard and known, which is why I reach out to people to have conversations. I have a good relationship, I hope. I could be totally self-deceptive in saying all this, but I hope I have a good relationship with that ego, and that sounds funny. But we are complex psychic beings. We are complex social beings. And so in the matter of identity, one of my exercises, one of my undertakings as an aging adult is to have a healthy relationship with what identity is, with what a persona is, with what the character of Justin is, that person that shows up for conversations, shows up in social situations. I love the idea of constantly scrutinizing myself, and not in a negative way, but just, looking at myself and saying, who are you? And who were you 10 minutes ago? Who were you 3 weeks ago? And are you on this continuum of development and plasticity and fluidity in terms of an identity, a being, a self that can be pinned down as, so in other words, there's personality charts like the Ocean Scale where the psychotherapist tries, you're an extrovertive. In terms of having an identity and having a self, I look at it as being something that's more like a verb than a noun. So the self that I am is selfing. And in this frame by frame proceeding into the future, but it is hopefully flexible, it is hopefully fluid and not anchored strongly to an identity of self that was 10 years ago or self that was a month ago, that I can grant myself that affordance to be a fluid self, possibly a dynamic self, but more of a fluid self, so that I don't become attached to an identity that gets me into trouble, that I start forming really strong opinions and looking at someone else and saying, well, they're not like me. And I could be completely self-deceptive in that, but I aspire to that at the very least, to be a fluid self, and knowing my identity is subject to change and it may not be authentic, and that's fine. I may not know who I am, and I'm okay with that.
So what does self-love look like for you?
Now, that is something I think we can pin down. When it comes to love, I think it is safe to have a static sense of self that you can point to inward and cultivate a relationship with self, which sounds weird because then we have to kind of get dual for a minute here, but it's circular. It's not that self is distinct. So there's something called a tonos, where you have a kind of a continuum, and they are dipole. They are not separate. They are a unitary system or substance. And so selfing could be that. And so when one loves oneself in a healthy way, not in a narcissistic way, but when one loves oneself sincerely, the awareness of that love is felt and reciprocated, so that you are confident in being yourself and that you trust yourself, just like you love your partner or a family member, that you can be confident in your skin to say, I am me, I am whole, and I love my, and here's another thing that we can throw in, that there are different species of love. There's filial love, there's eros, there's agape, there's 2 or 3 other species of love. So you can have different kinds of love for yourself. When we hear eros, we think of lovers and romance and things like that. But eros is really just the attraction. It is the lure. And so that gets converted into romantic love usually, or the idea, in popular culture. But really, eros is so strong in that it is an attraction. It is a desire to know and to be with someone. And one person that I interviewed recently gave me a wonderful definition of love, and it is to make oneself vulnerable to know another. So you can make yourself vulnerable to know yourself. And that vulnerability is to let go of the constructed identity and the constructed persona. Really try to explore, what is my essence? What is my soul? What is my psychic constituency that I can rely on? And again, that has to be fluid too, because but you can frame it and say that I am a self and that I am who I am.
Yeah, so is there any practice you have done to identify yourself or who you are?
Actually, I go the other way, and I have a practice that deconstructs who I am and my selfing. But it's not to then depersonalize or dissociate into a non-self or a non-identity. We, as living, until I pass away, I have an identity, I have a self. But to define the self or to define an identity, to me, I don't know if I'm as interested in that as I am interested in what is the self doing? What is it going to create next? What is it going to say next? Right? What's the spontaneity that might arise? So if I form a really strong identity, like Justin is this, Justin is that, there's 7 criteria for this. Well, those are confinements, I think. Those are almost like, I don't want to say limitations, but they are rigid rather than fluid. And it's okay to do that, but know that might change. The order might change, or the description might change in 6 months. Something really powerful could happen to you in your life, and then suddenly that self or that identity is different. It doesn't have to be radical, or it doesn't have to be anything, earth-shattering. But I just think in that sense that, yes, I'm a self. And yes, I express myself, I have a persona. And my persona changes with the people I'm with. Sometimes if I'm hanging out with guys, we talk differently, or we're a little whatever's going on is different. And then in this situation, out of respect to you and showing up in good faith, I want to be present. I want to try to sound coherent and deliver myself in a way that will produce a good dialogue with you. So we change, we have to be kind of fluid like that. And I think it's all kind of under the cover of our, so in other words, maybe more subconscious than real-time consciousness, like our self-awareness or metacognitive capacity to really grok that. But I think it's a good exercise, or it's an interesting exercise, to know that you are a self and you have an identity, but really to give it space, give it latitude, and say, well, who knows what I'll be tomorrow? And it doesn't have to be a radical change. It's just what situation, it's context, what situations will I be in? Who will I be surrounded by? And how do I best comport myself with those people? That we connect, that we enter into different strains of connection, different types of connection, which go back to those kind of loves. Agape, and do I need to forgive someone? Do I need to be a strong person for them when they are suffering? More the philia, the love of friends, which is what philia is, love of communication and sharing and cooperation and reciprocity in that regard. This is the flexibility and the fluidity that can be afforded to somebody if they acknowledge selving and acknowledge identity, but maybe not going too much further beyond that, unless they want to, and just say, well, what am I today? What am I made of?
Yeah. So, is there any simple ritual or reminder that helps you to stay grounded when things feel overwhelmed or noisy around you?
I have a means to help me in chaos and stochasticity and all these fancy things that, the world is turbulent and we are unpredictable creatures. And that is to just be the observer, is to observe. Now, that's not to say I don't get triggered and I get, a little cranky about things. Somebody does something stupid or messes up my game a little bit and I've got to, try to fix something. I'll get cranky. What I think in the broader picture when I see the world and everybody in it is I am the observer and I want to know the meta perspective of what's going on. So if I see somebody behaving irrationally and they're angry or they're outbursts or whatever, I think, okay, here's somebody who may be wounded. Here's somebody who's living in a fear state. They're in a victim consciousness. And how do I approach this? If they're assaulting me, then I react in a particular way. If they're not assaulting me and they're not a threat to me, then I would say, well, can I be of service or availability to this person? If not, then I just observe it. So I guess there's a lot of qualifiers to this, but when I see things that are upsetting or concerning, I just try to be, I don't want to say pragmatic about it, that's a little too dry, but I just try to be the observer of it and say, okay, we are humanity and we have shadow and light, and shadow shows up sometimes and people do shadowy things. We hear about that all the time. But also people show up in light and they show up as teachers and helpers and healers and lovers of the different species of love. There's the agape that shows up that forgives you for being like, I do stupid things all the time and I pray for agape when that happens. Like, I'm so sorry, can you forgive me? It's not like I did it malfeasantly, like I was being a jerk, but I just did something dumb and somebody will say, oh, don't worry about it, we'll fix it. And I'm like, oh, thank you for that. I appreciate your charity in helping a fool like me to get through something where I did something dumb. So that's how I would want the world to treat me, and how I would wish, to treat the world, is to be the observer and to just say, okay, I see what's going on here. And before I jump to any conclusions, I'm going to try to be cautious about this and make sure I have the full context, the full story, and then I'll make a decision about what's going on. So it's prudence, I think, is a good word, prudence.
Yeah. Beautiful. So we are at the end of conversation. Like, you have taken now so many podcasts with different guests. What is your learnings that have stuck with you and that has helped you a lot in your journey?
I've been touched and affected by everyone I've had a conversation with. And probably if I were to encapsulate takeaways that have benefited me, I would say it is so I'll list off some virtues. I don't possess them, but I wish to embody them. So imagination, curiosity, wonder, respect, and probably above all, love. And not the emotion of love, but again, those species of love that you can inhabit or embody in a time when it's essential. When you have a friend that's hurting, you are the phila. You show up as that friendship and you are supportive. Or if it's agape, you are forgiving someone, or you are being the stronger person who can be supportive in that sense. And the eros is that you want so much to learn, and you want to extract from somebody their wisdom or whatever it is, their sage that's going on, and that you will be in a debt of gratitude to them for that. So, the eros is the lure. And I've had the lure of the eros for a lot of my guests. It's like, oh my gosh, you have imparted upon me so much wisdom, and the best I can do is just to try to transmit that back out. I'll be the conduit that shares the ideas. So those are the lessons, I think, the broader lessons. And the imagination is so incredibly powerful. It is the wellspring of our creativity. It is our arts, our music, our philosophy. It is everything. And it gives birth to things like technology and advancement, what we call advancement in society. It is. So, Bill Gates in 1975 with his computers, he's using his imagination as well as his high horsepower IQ, but he's sitting there imagining things, and a lot of great inventors do that. So imagination, wonder, you have to kind of approach life from like, wow, this is just so, when you really think about it, it's just really amazing. So these seemingly innocuous or everyday kind of things are just so incredibly powerful that if you revisit them and give them that respect and the power that they deserve, then oh my God, it'll reward you so much. So that's the awe and the gratitude I have for all of the people I've interacted with, and people whom I haven't interacted, people I just sit and listen to, and they just expound all these ideas, and I'm like, I wick it up and try to synthesize it with how I've taken on other information and update things. And so yeah, I've been so fortunate to keep the company with people who have some incredible ideas and who are working for the good of humanity, true, good, beautiful. They are staying true to an idea that we deserve a good life. We deserve to flourish. We deserve to live in well-being. All of us, every one of us, there are no exceptions, that we deserve that. And the beauty that can arise, so true, good, beautiful, the beauty that can arise from that. And true is different for everybody, good is different for everybody, and beautiful. But there's still a common thread through all of that. Just like every one of us knows joy, we all know suffering, we know love, we know heartache. We are so bound together by these commonalities. And it's the same for abstracted ideas like true, good, and beautiful. That if you see the thread, you see the commonality, then you're onto something good that will bear fruit for you.
That line was beautiful. I loved it. And
Oh,
yeah, and I could see like there's so much oneness, but then there's uniqueness, and we all can learn from each other. And that is a beautiful saying. You're doing it. And I'm truly grateful to have you today on the podcast. I learned a lot. There were a lot of new things. I'm going to revisit those. And I'm sure our audience will love that too, especially the love species. I had no idea about those, or the connection you talked about it. So I'm truly, truly grateful, and thank you.
Absolutely. And I am grateful to you for opening up this space for us to have a conversation. So thanks to you as well. I appreciate that because, again, I do love to talk, but when I talk, I want to have reverence and respect for the space that is open and for the ears that are taking in the information. And that if I say anything, it is meant to be something that I pass on to somebody that may be of value to them, that may help them. And that's probably the humility lesson that I learned from being sick a few years ago, was that, we have choices, and how do we show up? How do we express ourselves to others? So thank you so much for this space and this opportunity.
All right.